Good morning and welcome. First of all, a very happy new year to everybody. Hopefully, year 2025 brings more happiness, better health, and peace all across the globe. If you remember in our last session, I showed you how you can integrate Microsoft Syntex services with Azure pay as you go pricing. In today's session, I'm here to give you an overview of storage services which falls under Microsoft Syntex and how you can utilize 365 archiving and backup to improve and protect your SaaS application. So let's start with the archiving services. And archiving service is designed to protect your inactive, or I will say, archive your inactive SharePoint sites. And why you need to do that? Maybe because of the compliance reason. You need to keep this data for a certain duration. Then you can utilize this Microsoft 365 archiving service. Now, with this, it will allow you to retain the data, but the data will be moved into a cold tier. And I'll explain you in a moment what does that mean. Now, while this data is under the cold tier, you have the same search capability and same security and compliance standard that you typically associate when the data is in hot tier. So you get the same kind of protection even though the data is moved to a cool tier. And why you'll do that, obviously one reason is because you want to keep it, maybe because of the compliance reason you need to keep it, and also sometime from the costing perspective. Now once this data is moved into a cool tier, it won't be available for the end user to see, but as an administrator you still have full control, so you can still do the e-discovery, you can do the search, but the end user won't be able to see this, right, once the data or the site has been moved into a cool tier. Now from the billing perspective, there are two costs associated. One cost is when the data is moved into a cool tier, you'll be charged 0.05 per GB per month. There's a cost to the storage. And then, in case you want to reactivate your site, the cost is zero point 0.6 per GB per month. So, two costs associated, obviously. One is the cost of the storage, and the other cost is the cost of restoring your SharePoint site. If you want to move them from inactive to active, then there is going to be a cost for that. But there are certain scenarios where you might not have to pay for the storage cost, which is this storage consumes. Let's say, for example, you have purchased SharePoint storage, a block of 200 gig, and out of that, you're only utilizing 100 GB, or let's say 150 GB of consumption, right? That's the data in your SharePoint storage. And you archive the data and you're utilizing the rest of the 50 GB. This data is in archive state. In this case, you're not going to pay this cost, which is 0.05, because you have already purchased 200 gig of block, and the data that has been archived is utilizing rest 50 GB, so you're not going to pay anything from the storage consumption perspective. Now, when you, let's say, archive the site in the first 7 days, the state of your site will be recently archived. That's going to be the state. Now, if within 7 days you want to restore the data, there are not going to be any reactivation charges. So this you're not going to pay zero point 0.6 per GB per month. In the first 7 days, sometimes this can happen uh, because of accidentally you have moved the data to the cool tier. So Microsoft is giving you this grace period of that if it is within 7 days, it's going to be in the recently archived state, and you're not going to pay anything in case you want to reactivate that site and make it available for the end user. Now, anything after 7 days, the state of the site going to be archived after 7 days. Now, if you're trying to archive, then there's going to be charge of zero point 0.6 per GB per month. But regardless of how much storage you have consumed after 7 days, you're going to pay for the reactivation charges, which is a little bit different from, as I mentioned, the storage cost, which I was talking about, which you're not going to pay in this scenario. But let's say you have consumed 200 GB, you have purchased 200 GB of SharePoint storage, and you have archived on top of that, and you utilize full 200 GB of SharePoint storage, and then you have archived 100 gig more, then you're going to pay zero point zero 0.05 per GB per month for that rest 100 gig. And obviously, for the reactivation, I told you after 7 days, that's going to apply regardless of the storage size that you have. Something to keep in mind. Now, this is what the cost is going to come from under the Microsoft 365 archiving. And as I mentioned, if you have to compare the cost of regular SharePoint storage, if I'm not mistaken, it is close to zero point 0.2 per GB per month. So zero point 0.2 per GB per month versus zero point zero 0.05, there's a huge cost difference. So you can have the saving, and obviously, a lot of companies, they have this requirement to keep the data, so that's a good way of keeping it archived, but also not breaking the bank too. Now, what is the advantage? One advantage of this is that because the data is archived in the SharePoint storage itself, so it means that it's much more faster when it comes from the archiving perspective, because you're not moving the data to any other location. It's within that particular tenant only. So it's going to be far more faster archiving. But when it comes to reactivating that particular site, it's going to take a longer time, because obviously it's in the archive state, it's in the cold tier, which is a cheaper option. So it might take a little bit more. But once that site is reactivated, the administrator can make it available for the end user to see. But archiving going to be really quick, because as I mentioned, it's going to be within the SharePoint, within the same storage that you're utilizing, and the reactivation might take a little bit longer, obviously depending upon the size of the site. But it can take maybe 48 hours even to reactivate that. So this is what Microsoft 365 archiving option is. Now let's look into the Microsoft 365 backup. Now this can be used for backing up your Exchange mailbox, your OneDrive, and your SharePoint sites. Now again, the reason can be because of the compliance. You have to keep the data to protect your user data from accidental deletion. And in case you're hit with some sort of ransomware, you have an insurance in form of Microsoft 365 backup that you can restore the data from, right? So these are some of the reason, obviously, why anybody does backup, not only just the SaaS application, but in fact any applications, whether it's on-prem or in the cloud. Now, from the billing perspective, the cost is 0.15 per GB per month. Now, these costs I'm talking about is in US dollars, so depending upon the currency, it will change. So, zero point 0.5 per GB per month of the protected item. And what are the protective items? These are the Exchange Mailbox, OneDrive, and the SharePoint sites, right? So that's going to be the cost for that. And when you are configuring this, you need to create a backup policy in which you're going to specify the retention policy as well as the backup frequency. Now, at the time I'm making this video, these things cannot be configured or cannot be modified, if I can say. So there is a limitation right now because this is a relatively new service that Microsoft has launched. So certain things is going to change. But when you are configuring this Microsoft 365 backup for your Exchange Mailbox, OneDrive, or SharePoint site, you have to configure backup policy like any backup policy, in which you have to create or configure retention policy and backup frequency. But these cannot be changed or cannot be modified as of right now. The maximum retention you can keep the data is 1 year. And this is stored in the blob storage. If you're familiar with Azure, then you might have heard about this. So it is stored in blob storage, a little bit different from the Microsoft 365 archive, which is still stored within the SharePoint storage. So a little bit different meter, but there might be a requirement. So that's why Microsoft has provided this option. But Microsoft 365 backup is a much more holistic protection, whether it comes to Exchange Mailbox, OneDrive, and SharePoint site. But the data is going to be stored in the blob storage, and the cost is going to be for that is 0.15 per GB per month. But as I said, these retention policy, backup frequency cannot be modified right now. But these are all, once the full backup is done, is always going to be incremental. That's the way it is configured. So whatever changes has been made from the last backup, that's the only changes will be backed up in the subsequent one. So these are all always incremental all after the first backup is done. Now after the backup is done, you might obviously you need to restore that data too. For that, you can pick from your recovery points, right? And you can restore the whole mailbox, the whole site. You can also go at the granular level. You can look at the Microsoft documentation exactly, what are the options, because they're a little bit different when it comes to uh, whether it's for you're doing for Exchange Mailbox, OneDrive, or SharePoint sites. But these are some of the things that you need to consider. Obviously, there are a lot of third-party application which can give you a little bit more flexibility in terms of when it comes to configuring and creating backup policy. But from the Microsoft perspective, under Microsoft Syntex, you can integrate that with your pay-as-you-go billing. If you're already utilizing Azure, you can configure that, and you don't need to worry about any per user licensing for that. So it's a quick and easy way to get it set up and make sure that your tenant data is protected, whether it's for the ransomware protection, accident deletion, or for compliance reason, you have to keep the data for. So this was a overview of Microsoft Syntex storage services and how you can configure archiving as well as backup for your SaaS application. Hope you found this useful. Thanks for watching. Have a good day.